Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear us clear enough. There's a little bit of background noise there. So thanks very much for attending the Strategic Mine Planning Masterclass. My name is Chris Bray. I'm a Principal Mining Consultant with the SRK Group for a long time, just over 18 years now. So I think I've learned something over, say, 25 plus years of mining experience, and I'm hoping to sort of share some of the experiences with developing strategic mine plans with those who are involved with technical mine planning in the audience, but also maybe it's going to be beneficial to project managers, those who are not so familiar with mine planning, to give you an overview of the complexity that we have to deal with and the analysis that we need to do to really optimize a mine plan and find, let's say, the preferred strategy for a new project. So as part of strategic mine planning, there's a lot of early stage questions that need to be we need to undertake analysis and provide results so that there can be informed decisions on such items as the production rate potential for a project. There's various complexities when you're dealing with a single deposit, but a lot of our projects are dealing with multiple projects, multiple saleable products, ranges of process recoveries that need to be applied to different mineral types and so on. So we've developed tools with SRK to be able to assess a really wide range of projects, and it seems to be working pretty well in providing some of those early answers that clients need to develop a strategic plan. The type of strategic plan that a client needs will depend on the type of company, what its goal is, and let's say the value, how advanced the project is. We get projects of all different shapes and sizes. Some of them are greenfields exploration, where there's limited test work, limited understanding on the resource themselves. Some of these are very early stage resources, but at the same time, we find a lot of projects come back after many years, and I see this with SRK, having been with SRK for many years. Some of the same projects come back. They weren't economic 10 years ago. The situation's changed. There's better process technologies, there's different mining approaches, automation, and suddenly something that wasn't economic 10 years ago is interesting again. And we have to be able to understand what the value is and assess things from a production rate potential, cut-off grade approach, and what are the applicable process approaches, mining methods to get the most value out of these opportunities. This figure provides a generic sort of timeline that all sort of projects experience, ranging from early stage exploration through to early stage project development studies, all the way through to advanced feasibility studies, going through construction, financing, production, potentially extensions to the life of mine plan, and finally a closure and rehabilitation process. So as part of the strategic mine plan, we need to be able to jump in at any stage of these projects, assess what are the options and how do they compare against each other, and what is the best strategy for your size company with the stage your project's at. Now, typically, when I would start a new project, the first thing that I try to detail is an understanding, firstly assuming that the project resource geologist has estimated something that is accurate, because that will determine what is the ultimate accuracy of the results coming out of the strategic analysis. Sorry, I have to be up here for an whole hour, so I might have to have a drink every so often, of water that is. And so for me, this could be the most important slide before we get into the sort of more detailed strategic assessment purposes. And for me, it's very important to detail out all of the input parameters and have a full understanding of everything that's going to drive value of that resource in the ground. And that means having assumptions that come from recognised sources, and I'm sure most of the people in this room will understand what that means. You know, what metal prices are reasonable to use as part of your strategic mine plan. A classic example, if we look at a gold project these days, gold price is sitting very high, probably still above $3,000 per ounce. However, you can't use that. Well, you could use that, but it's a huge risk to the project if you're using, let's say, spot prices compared to longer-term forecast prices from recognised sources. Other aspects that are critical to inputs into your strategic mine plan, such things as, you know, how much process test work has been done on different ore types. Do we have a good understanding of how those process recoveries for the different metals will change with the grades? A very important factor. And follow-on process test work information to inform yields to different concentrates, process recoveries to final metals. I mean, for a project, there are many different options that can be assessed. You know, does the mine want to produce a final metal project, or which will come with additional capital and operating costs for downstream processing, or is a more realistic option for that project to go for let's say, a saleable concentrate, which is less upfront capital, lower operating costs, and so on, but has a much more realistic sort of investment plan and capital requirements to achieve that. So by breaking everything down if you can do it in exactly the same way that you would build up a technical economic model, and this is the same approach I would use, is just for your NSR or cut-off grade calculations. If you have a ton coming into a process plant, just build up all those follow-on calculations from 1 ton of ore. How much metal did you start with? How much metal is being recovered through to concentrates? If it's a complex ore with multiple metals, you know, what are the options there in terms of splitting that into multiple concentrates? In terms of what is it going to cost to get that those concentrate tonnages from that single ton of ore to a smelter? What's the cost of that? Considering there's going to be a moisture content applied to that. When it gets to the smelter, what's a reasonable treatment charge to apply to that? What's the smelter going to pay you for those metals that are within those concentrates? Are there refining charges for precious metals, etc.? And so you can just build up the sort of logic, the calculation from a ton of raw material received at a process plant and work it all the way through to the value that's received at the end once it's been through the smelter, so on. So when you work your way through that process, let's just say for a gold project, a reasonable sort of long-term gold price at this stage to reduce the risk of the gold price going down in the future might be, say, somewhere between $2,200 to $2,400 per ounce. Now, by the time that comes to what you're actually going to get paid to, once it's recovered, once the costs have been taken into account to produce the metal, that $2,200 might be down to $800, let's say. So what I'm explaining here is good practice, and this is why I want to spend a little more time on this particular slide, is please please build up logic to that you feel comfortable that you're understanding how much metal is being lost along the way through process recoveries for different process options being considered, whether that's to options for a single concentrate, multiple concentrates, or perhaps downstream processing with additional costs to get it through to final metals. And once you've sort of worked your way through all of that, you come out with these very nice, I don't think the pointer's reaching so far there, but right at the bottom of the table, you can see the end result is that we come to in this NSR formula, a dollar value per gram of silver or per gram of gold, a dollar value per percent lead, per percent zinc, and all of those individual metals have had their the appropriate recoveries and costs taken into account. And once you get it to that stage and you're confident and the functionality works, you can change the metal price, you can change recoveries if things change, and it'll flow through to those calculations. And then when you have everything in a, let's say, dollar term, you can take it to the next step as well. So if you want everything, let's just say the primary commodity is zinc, we can convert all of those additional metals into an equivalent zinc type formula because we already have everything in a dollar term, dollar per gram, dollar per percent lead, and then it becomes very easy. So just to stress that spend your time developing that methodology. Once you've done this methodology, this can be worked back to your resource because the resource geologist needs to know the same sort of breakdown on what the potential is going to be for constraining their mineral resources. At the same time, you've already developed your logic for your economic model. When your strategic mine plan is developed further, you have all the calculations in place. So really spending time here means that you won't have to reinvent the wheel, you won't have to rebuild the calculations at the resource stage as well as the end economic modelling stage. So now that I've spent a little bit of time focusing the importance of building up your NSR calculations, your cut-off grades, you can start having fun with the relationships between This is an area I think I look at projects in Kazakhstan, let's say, and I see operations. It's actually very good to see some familiar faces, including from clients in this neck of the woods. And I know that they follow a similar process, but I think there's opportunities to make the mine planning process more efficient, quicker, and easier for the technical staff at operations. Let's just say I've seen, you want to get at the stage where you're able to calculate the value within your block model so that you can start running your optimizations, whether it's open pit, underground, and so on. But having done reviewed hundreds of different mines over the years and also supported in this area, there are most of the time simpler ways of estimating the value within, let's say, your block models that could be beneficial in saving time, making things easier for you. What I've seen in the past is you have a block model, 100% accurate from our resource geologists. Within that block model, you're estimating, essentially you want to estimate a NSR value of every block within that block model. However, what I've seen some companies do in Kazakhstan and other parts of the world is they will separately estimate for the single blocks the recovery for a single block. In the model, they'll have multiple fields and steps estimated within the block model to build up the end sort of value of a block within a model. If you follow an approach like this, you're able to incorporate all of those process recoveries, all of those yields to concentrates, end value of the metal into a single formula. Okay? And what this is showing is after you've been through that NSR calculation process, you can see how it behaves when the grade changes. Some of our projects have variable recoveries, so as the grade changes, so does the process recovery, and that flows through to the value. So you can see the trends that come out of that. You can look for trend lines of best fit, and usually you can select a trend line function which is going to replicate your whole complex NSR formula into a single calculation that you can put into your block model. So in a lot of ways, you don't have to deal with multiple fields in already very big resource block models. You can narrow the calculation down, once you're comfortable with it, to a single formula. You can see in this example, we're looking at an ore feed which has zinc, lead, silver. The base case here is that will report to two separate concentrates, typically a zinc concentrate and with payable zinc, and you'll have a separate lead concentrate which will have payable silver in that as well. And that's all being taken into account all the way through in those NSR calculations. Now, with variable process recoveries, very easy. You've got the calculation there. Just keep changing the grade and see how the NSR formula behaves. Now you've got the relationship between NSR value for the individual metals, and then you just pull them all together, into a single big formula. It's all transparent, and you can pretty much replicate your NSR value with a single calculation in your block model. So what sort of questions can be answered? Evgeny, this is not gold, this is copper. It's a different project. By the way, this is quite a long session. It is an hour. My good colleague, Evgeny Sivankov, he's sitting up the back there. If you have a burning question that you just need to ask, Evgeny can provide the microphone to ask that, although I probably won't hear it. But otherwise, we can chat after the presentation. So let's just say there are operations which have multiple process options for sending different grades of material to. So in this example, we're looking at an operation which has potential to send material to a heap leach for extraction of the copper, or we can send it to the flotation plant. Now, each of those has a different relationship on the value. The heap leach will have a lower recovery than the flotation. The heap leach will be cheaper process costs, whereas if we want to send it to flotation, we'll get higher recovery, but that will come at a higher cost, okay? So what we can do is we can build up two NSR formulas to understand that relationship of grade to NSR revenue for if we send it to the heap leach or to the flotation plant. And it's great that when you have those calculations in place, you can see how that behaves over a range of grades. Now what this is showing is that now I have very good visibility on when it becomes profitable to send lower grade material, in this case about 0.2% copper, to the heap leach. On an operating cost basis, it's making money. We can see that at a little bit higher grade, it makes sense to send that material to the flotation plant. However, we can see with this relationship that the heap leach is more profitable as a result of the difference in process cost to recovered metal up until a certain point. And so, as an engineer, this gives us very good guidance on understanding at what break-even cutoff we can send material to the heap leach, and at what point does it make sense to switch and send that material to the flotation plant. So again, everything reverts back to that NSR calculation and spending a good amount of time and getting everything detailed so that you understand how the calculation works and it makes sense, and you can start to have good visibility on how these different process options can be compared. Okay, so I guess most of the people in the audience here are working in a technical capacity, and once we have value estimated within our resource block model, we're able to start assessing it from a mine planning perspective. That means getting an understanding. You know, we really need to test out many different areas to work out what's practically economic for an open pit operation, what's practically economic for a range of underground mining methods, and how do the two come together. Okay, so when we take it to this step, we already have our NSR values estimated within the block model, and we start to apply practical mining dimensions to that. For an open pit assessment, we'll take the block model, we will apply a regularization process so that we have practical selective mining units, minimum shape sizes that can be excavated within a open pit. For an underground optimization, we're going to specify parameters such as minimum mining width, what's the sort of minimum stope sizes in terms of height, reasonable length, etc., and just to see how that behaves. And we'll show the effect of that in the next slide or two. So what we can also see is the impact. We're starting to see the impact when we run those optimizations of if we increase the cutoff grade, the NSR cutoff. You know, we're starting to see a decrease in tons that are mineable versus increase in the grade that's coming out of that. So we want to understand the relationship there. You know, obviously there's a compromise somewhere in between. If we mine the maximum tons, the grade's going to be very low. If we go for a high grade option, we're going to have very few tons to work with. So probably the best strategy solution is somewhere in the middle. Okay, just this kind of shows an example of a deposit, and the color coding is the cooler, the colder colors, the blues, the greens, and so on, are showing a lower NSR value that have sort of come out of the block model, and the hotter, the reds are. This is where the high value material is. And let's just say for a open underground operation, when we apply the stope optimizer, this is the impact of changing the NSR cutoff. Now the NSR cutoff is typically going to cover, well, the NSR value in the block model is the in situ value in the ground, what it's worth once it can be turned into final product. Now the NSR cutoff is a function of what does it cost to get out of the mine, what does it cost to process it, as well as your general and administration costs. So that's typically what comprises the NSR value. And you can see from this that as you apply a higher cutoff, the ore body is shrinking, okay? But at the same time, this comes back to that tonnage grade curve that the higher the cutoff, the tons will shrink, the grade will go up. So this is only looking at things from an operating cost basis. But if you think about it, let's say the lowest cutoff there, $30 a ton NSR value for mining, processing, G&A. Okay, if we do that, we've got a maximised tonnage. Great. Okay, but what you're not seeing there is that you're going to need a bulk mining method to achieve the mining cost for that. What it's not showing you is you're probably going to leave maybe up to 30% of the resource in the ground, because in that operating cost is not a cost for backfill. So that means you have to leave, let's say, 30% of the resource in place there as a pillar, so the whole thing just doesn't fall apart. Okay, so it's an early stage of the mine planning process. You might be getting more tons at a certain grade, but behind that NSR value, when you follow it through into detailed mine planning, is you're actually you might be accepting a lower recovery and a lower mining extraction. If we go to the extreme, the NSR value greater than $70 a tonne, great, we're spending a lot more to get that resource out of the ground. Our tonnage has shrunk, that's a downside. However, we're now, all of a sudden, we're paying for a backfill plant. That means we can extract more of the resources. We're paying for a more expensive process, which means we have a higher recovery. So it's all a balancing act, you know. It's not clear cut, just running a stope optimization, applying a break-even cutoff grade. You need to add on these layers of analysis to come to your preferred strategic approach. At the same time, depending on the company, they might only have the potential to raise so much investment for a basic process flotation type plant. Whereas, let's say to get to the NSR greater than $70 with maximum process recovery, then you could be talking hundreds of millions of dollars more for downstream processing to achieve that. So there's all these factors that need to be taken into consideration. Another thing we want to understand on the mine planning side in making an assessment of the strategic mine plan is what level spacing makes sense. You can see here we've got existing as-builts of a mine. Could be an operating mine. It could, or it might be, or it is a restart of a historic mine that closed down many years ago. So what some of the analysis that we do is we run different stope sizes, again, to see how that behaves. We can run the smallest underground mining method minimum stope shape, which in this case is a level spacing of 20 metres, but sort of 10 metre lengths and a minimum mining width associated with that. And you can see that that's going to pick up a lot of the mineral resources which are above the NSR cutoff. If we go for larger stope sizes, we're going to introduce more dilution coming into those minimum stope shapes, which is going to lower the NSR value of those blocks because you've got additional dilution coming in. Okay, so obviously we want to maximise what we get out from the resource. We don't just cut down resources out of spite to geologists. We're not that bad people. We're just trying to prove up the best economic case. But if we go for the smallest stope size to maximise the extraction of the resource, it's going to cost, your operating cost is going to be a lot more expensive for an underground mine, and it's going to require a lot more machinery, a lot more people, higher operating costs. So that's the downside of trying to maximise your extraction with a smaller selective mining unit for underground. If we go for bigger stope sizes, the downside is we're going to introduce more dilution, bigger stope sizes, but we can bulk mine with less equipment, less people, and our operating cost is going to be lower. Now just sort of switching over to the open pit side, and we'll talk about assessing things from an underground perspective, stope optimization, looking at the open pit potential, and then we want to bring both of these together to understand, do we only look at open pit, do we only look at underground, or is it somewhere in between is the best case for us for this deposit economically? Okay, if those of you who are familiar with running open pit optimizations, I used to run them about 10 years ago, so I don't run the software, but I have a talented sort of team that can operate the software, and these are the sort of outputs that come out from open pit optimization. You have your metal price estimates, assumptions as a basis. The pit optimization will apply revenue factors to that, so you specify those revenue factors, and you can see that there's a whole range of target ultimate pits that you need to assess to determine what's the best pit size for the project, let's say. And what we can see is at the far end of the scale, we have the largest pit that's falling out of that optimization. We get the maximum resources, but so as part of this comparison, we are looking at with the resources that can be extracted from open pit, how much waste comes along with it. So you can see that the waste profile is extremely important. You know, it's not just a win to extract the maximum resources. You have to pay for all the waste that's coming out as well. Through the open pit optimization softwares, it enables you to put in breakdown of operating costs, recoveries to saleable products, and you can see the impact on discounted cash flows for each of those options, those pit shells. And you can see that somewhere in between, you know, the rate of increase of cash flow is starting to level off. So the more of the resource that you want to target, there's let's say, a reducing cash flow that's coming along with that. So that's important to understand, that the biggest pit is not always the best pit. And if you go, let's just say you wanted to maximize the target, the next consideration other than the economics is, what are you going to do with all the waste? I mean, this is huge. You're talking, not to mention the tailings that are going to be produced from processing that ore. You've got multiples of that in waste that needs to be stored on the surface somewhere. So it's many things that sort of need to be looked at and assessed in determining what is the best strategic mine plan for your project. Another question that sort of come up from clients as well as colleagues over the years is trying to understand, we have a resource, you know, what's the production rate potential from that resource? Well, it really depends on, you know, what cutoff grade, what NSR cutoff that you're applying to it, because that will have an impact on the resource. Okay, a typical sort of rule of thumb, let's say, or based on benchmarking of open pit and underground mines, is that the production rate potential is related to the tons per vertical metre. And you can see there's obviously, it's always a range. It's not like one number, you know, so many tons per vertical metre will relate to a certain production tonnage. There's always a range. But as you can see here, typically for an open pit, they can mine around 8 benches a year, okay, which is a vertical sink rate of somewhere between 40 to 60 metres per year. So that's a good starting point to understand the range of production rate potential for the pit. Obviously, it will depend on the working area that you have within an open pit. Similarly, but that's only going to come out of detailed planning. So it's just estimating, you know, approximately where is the production rate potential. When we look at underground mining, again, it's related to tons per vertical metre. How quickly can we advance decline access development in an underground mine? Benchmarks of operating mines show that this ranges between 20 to 70 metres of vertical development per year. So you can see that's your limiting factor of mining from underground. Now there is actually other factors that need to be taken into account as well. If you are going to mine underground, typically you will have a decline, and that a decline or a shaft, but you've got to keep in mind that they have their production rate limits as well. So let's just say there is a relationship between a single decline, and let's just say you've got truck haulage. The deeper the mine gets, the more trucks need to operate to get that tonnage through a single decline. And that decline has a limit into how much fresh air ventilation can be put in there. So ultimately, the ventilation will limit the amount of trucks that can operate in a single decline. And as that deposit gets deeper, let's say the production rate increases by multiple trucks is going to start leveling off as well. So another consideration is, great, you've got a big deposit that has a very big production rate potential, but if you're only planning for one decline, you won't be able to realise that production rate potential. You're going to have to look at any bottlenecks within a single shaft or a single decline. You might have to put in multiple shafts, multiple declines, if you want to, which is going to cost a lot more money to realise the potential of the deposit itself. And a lot of through analysis, if we have a deposit, we look at the individual sort of deposits. We break it down by level, so we get a good understanding of, where is the concentration of tonnage on a elevation basis below surface. And you can also see, hopefully you can see, it's a bit small, but we've got all of the reported grades that are coming out between those elevations. So we can also, as well as the concentration of tonnages by elevation, we're also seeing the NSR, concentration of NSR, how is the NSR value spread by elevation as well. And it's only by looking at these numbers and doing the analysis and seeing the graph at the bottom there, we can understand the relationship. We can see as the NSR cutoff changes, gets higher, your tonnage is dropping off, your grade is going up, but now we can start mapping in what impact that has on the production rate potential. So as you're increasing your NSR cutoff, your ore body is shrinking, and so is your production rate potential. So, it really is a balancing act between all these different areas. All right, going through this pretty quickly. So anyway, working on multiple projects of all different shapes and sizes. Some are greenfields, some are existing operations, some are restart of historic mines, some are mines at the end of their life. Do they close the mine now at a substantial cost, or do they invest? Is it worth them investing to try and extend the mine life? What's the best strategic economic case? So after working with many, many projects, we sort of break everything down into all these steps to understand, what are the options and how do they compare against each other. So based on the time that's slipping away, this is a typical sort of flow of how we would start with the NPV calculation into the block model, and the different steps we would go through for assessing each of those options, underground, open pit, and getting all the results so that we can compare like for like. This shows a typical table breakdown of all of the different options that we might need to consider for a project, combinations of open pit, underground only, different backfill versus non-fill approaches, different mining methods with different capital and operating cost sort of that come along with that, different processes, trying to identify the range of cutoff grade or NSR cutoffs that we want to test. And what we can see down the bottom here, you have to put in a naming convention, because by the time you map out all of the options that you want to compare against each other, you're talking about 180 plus options. So once you've got it all mapped out, you can collect all of the results. Everything is compared like for like. They're all based on the same metal prices, the same logic, with variable capital and operating costs applied for the mining method, the process method, and we're able to see on a comparative basis how the NPV compares between the different options, how that changes for a single option with a changing cut-off grade or NSR cut-off, what that does to the mineral inventory, what that does to the grade. So this, and we can also see each table going down is looking at a different production rate. So we get, there's just so many options. This provides a nice visibility on how all of those options compare like for like against each other. We also want to understand, let's just say, a lot of the time we have multiple deposits that have different geometry, different process recoveries, different suites of metals. So for a single project, we need to break all of those down into different areas. They have their own individual NSR formulas based on the process recovery, what are the final saleable products, and we're able to run them standalone, not all together, look at them standalone and see how they stand up against each other. Sometimes with the full burden, what happens if you were just to run that individual deposit, what's its production rate potential, and how does that compare against each of the other areas, zones? And from this type of analysis, we can, again, get much better visibility. We can select the preferred cut-off value for each area. We understand the production rate potential that comes along with that. And then we can also start mapping out the priority on how much value that's going to, how we're going to maximize the value coming out of those deposits. And then once we understand that, we take it to the next level. So overall, we've got these different mining areas. We have an understanding of their production rate potential. We've selected the optimum NSR cutoff. Now, what happens when we pull them all together and we want to target an overall production rate? So as part of stress testing that, we bring them all together, basically, and we get an understanding of lower overall production targets. Maybe a single area at a time can sustain that. But as we look at higher economies of scale, higher production rates, we're going to have to start mining multiple deposits at the same time. So using this very methodical approach, we're able to understand, and again, make another decision with regards to our strategic mine plan. Typically, we start by focusing on the project economics. We all have CEOs who are chasing the highest NPV and all the rest of it, which is great. But then you look at how much waste is being generated. Now, we have different combinations of open pit, combined open pit underground only, and they all have different waste profiles. We want to understand from a closure perspective how much mine waste, how much tailings is going to be stored on the surface at the end of the mine life. This will very much influence the strategic case, and it will maybe be more important than the overall project economics. So through this process, we can see, let's just say the red numbers there, we're talking 50 million tonnes plus of waste that needs to be stored on surface. It's not small versus underground only methods where we can send some of the tailings back underground. In some of the underground mining methods, we might not even actually have enough waste to use that particular method. So we actually have to bring waste into the mine so we can use that strategy. This shows another example of, just racing through the slides. Obviously, in this type of in this particular deposit, we had steeper dipping resources higher up in the mine at depth. The project had to make a decision: do we change to lower dipping mining methods? If they stayed with the steeper dipping mining methods, they'd be introducing a lot more dilution waste. So just going through all of those steps, we were able to determine that we can use bulk steeper dipping mining methods at a lower NSR cutoff in the upper levels. When you got to the shallower dipping parts of the deposit at depth, even though the mining cost was going to be higher, there was a justification based on the reduced dilution to move to a lower dipping mining method. The other interesting part of this one is, I think it's not that often that the ore development itself plays such an important role with achieving the overall production rate target. And you can see on the profile there, the deeper the mine goes, the greater portion of development ore tons actually need to make up the process feed to reach the target production rate. So strategically, we had to reduce the development NSR cutoff. Otherwise, we wouldn't have enough tons to actually meet the production rate, overall production rate target. So you learn through doing this sort of analysis. You can't apply the same rules. Every ore body is unique. So that was a really interesting case, that one there. Okay, considering inferred resources. In a lot of cases, it actually makes sense to have two mine plans. For a lot of mines, particularly going through pre-feasibility study, feasibility study, operating mines, it's very important that the end result is able to support a reserve statement. And to support a reserve statement, the inferred resources would have to be removed. However, from a mine planning perspective, it's very important to consider those inferred resources when you're designing the mine, because in a lot of ways it's looking longer term. We need to look beyond what's going to be reported as a reserve statement, and we really need those resources, inferred resources there, which are not all at depth. Some of them are higher up, because we need to strategically know where to put our declines, where to put our vent shafts, where to put our materials handling systems, passes, etc., so that in the years ahead, when the inferred resources get upgraded through infill drilling, we don't have a ventilation pass going right through your previous inferred resources. So what we found is the best practice to do is design everything, including the inferred, so you can strategically locate your infrastructure central to the ore body with the inferred, and then when it comes to preparing an ore reserve statement, we remove the inferred, and we're able to easily trim all of the additional development, any infrastructure that we don't need to support the reserve estimate, we can remove that. And so you've managed the risk around inferred being converted into measured indicated in the future. So planning for the future, looking ahead, not just focusing on what's a reserve right now. So, these are practices which can save you a lot of time, pain, redesign. So it might be interesting for you. When it comes to considering inferred resources for open pit, again, a similar perspective, but different sort of considerations for open pit. It's like, again, we will be looking to, the client will be interested in achieving a reserve statement at the end of that, but we should be planning to consider future inferred being converted to measured indicated resources with drilling in the future years. So if we run the open pit optimization with all of the inferred, we get a nice boundary of where the ultimate pit could eventually end up. And as part of that, we also need to look into a crystal ball and think, well, where could the metal prices land in the future as well? Gold is spot price of $3,000 today. Let's just say in 20 years' time, if it's such a big mine, that metal price could get up to $5,000. I don't know. So you can test out all these scenarios to work out what could this pit be in the very long-term future. And from that, sensibly, you should be planning for your waste storage facilities, any infrastructure outside of that boundary. If you put it inside that boundary, then there's a risk in the future that the pit may get bigger and, well, you may not be able to expand the pit without rehandling waste you put there before, or you might have put your process plant there as well. So these are just broad areas to consider. Now, definitely the last 10 years, the consideration of environmental, social aspects, decarbonisation, closure planning has been increasingly important. And alongside waste management, we also need to look at opportunities. We need to start layering on what constraints have we got, what has the corporate team promised investors, the public, in terms of their commitments on the environmental social side. So you start need to layering in, all of these promises, all of these constraints into your strategic mine plan as well, to make sure it ticks hopefully most of the boxes. So there's a list there. A lot of it needs a lot of consideration on how you're going to manage water, how you're going to manage waste, how you're going to minimise your carbon footprint and impact on the environment. Now, I guess from our perspective, we always tend to start a mine plan as a conventional mine operation that uses, a good portion of diesel-powered equipment. For us, that's important as our base case, because some of the alternatives that we want to test out, the resource might not be able to pay for it. Okay, so we might as well start with the worst environmental case scenario and see if we can improve it and see if there's a good case for justifying that from an investment perspective. So as part of that, we will estimate the emissions that are coming from a conventional diesel-powered fleet. Okay, that's our base case, and then we'll look for options. How can we improve that? And some of that will need adjustments to the mine plan itself. We may need to look at a different design for infrastructure, in-pit crushing, conveying systems, putting in trolley assist systems which will reduce our carbon footprint, and then we'll see what sort of reduction in emissions versus what is the resulting capital and operating costs that come from that. So this informs management on the cost of, let's say, some of their promises to market on cutting carbon footprint, emissions, and so on. It does come at a cost, and it won't always be sustainable or attractive for investors. So that's another area to look at. Okay, so with pretty much any project, before we get involved in a detailed study, we want to run these trade-off assessments to understand what we're working with, what the potential is. And for me, the safest way is to develop a phased approach. You understand the potential, you look at the options, and it's important to go through a process like this so it's easily communicated to the client. Well, when I say client, you might be a technical engineer within a company, and the same applies. You have to show your analysis to the boss, and you need to be able to explain it clearly, because it will get challenged, and then the CEO and that management won't necessarily understand the detailed technical aspects, so you have to present it in such a way that they can understand it. Usually dollars and tons of mine waste and tailings. But anyway, okay, so we've narrowed down our selection of a strategic case, or maybe it's a few strategic cases that the company wants to take further into more detailed assessment. Okay, so what is really important is, what do you want to achieve, by the end of a feasibility study? Okay, you've got a base case strategy, right? We can plough ahead with that, but do we have all of the data? Do we have all of the data? Do we have all of the test work to support that? Okay, we have a strategic case. We've considered inferred. Now that might be part of the strategic case, but to reach our goal of a reserve estimate for investment purposes and so on, We need targeted infill drilling to convert that inferred into measured indicators as a basis for a future reserve estimate. Obviously, there's no guarantees that all of the inferred will be upgraded, so there's risks attached to that. You're going to be able to defend all of the input assumptions, modelling, whether that's resource modelling, hydrogeology, water modelling, geotechnical processing, geochem. You've got to have the minimum amount of data and the quality of data to be able to defend that when you've gone into the detailed planning stage. So it's critical that you understand those gaps that need to be plugged in terms of collecting data, infill drilling, test work, and so on, because that's never cheap, and it's a lot of work to be carrying on in parallel. And basically, detailed planning, a lot of the time, although it doesn't always work that way, can't progress until you have that base data, otherwise it's a risk to the project when that data is available down the line. Okay, so just in concluding remarks, I've outlined some tools which we've learnt from doing things the hard way over the years, and there's more and more pressure on technical teams, consultants to get the answers quicker. We've got all these better software solutions from Azus at Datamine and the team to run all of that. But guess what? With all these software solutions and so on, it's great. We can do more work, but companies, clients want the answers quicker as well. So hopefully you can adopt similar practices. Happy to talk later on, applications that can be applicable for your operation. But at the same time, after 18 years working for SRK, I'm learning all the time. Still, it never ends, Technologies are changing, so keeps it interesting, So, and definitely, last 2 points down there is it's becoming more and more important, very important for projects to have taken into account environmental, social factors, carbon footprint. So it's good as a technical engineer to really understand the impact of that and have the results ready when those questions come later, and do things as a phased approach. Based on the information you have now, see, work out the potential of the different options based on the resources that you have, and identify any gaps, data, so that you don't get any nasty surprises when you go into the detailed planning work. So, that's all I have. If anyone's got a burning question now, my colleague Evgeny up the back there has. Thanks for hanging in there.
Well, good day everyone. I will have not maybe a question but a comment. First of all, thank you very much, Chris, for such a great presentation. So much information in terms of strategical planning. I believe everyone finds something useful from your presentation. Just wanted to comment, I'm very glad to see the software of Datamine has been used a lot in your presentation. I see the screenshots like Studio and PVS and Mineable Shape Optimizer, which is MSO. And I just want to have my comment is, when you come to Chris for any questions, we're also more than happy to help if there is any questions regarding the technology and software. Just a comment. Thank you very much, Chris. Good to see you.
Thank you. And we get stronger together. Hopefully you can learn something from me. I've learned stuff from our competitors, working with different operations over the years. So keeps it interesting. And any of these tools that I described here, they really are just tools. Software. Some of these strategic planning tools, they will make your life easier, more efficient. But at the end of the day, you have to put in the hard work, and the experience helps as well. So it's not just sitting behind a computer and pressing a button. Although maybe one day with artificial intelligence it will be. I might be too old for that. So thank you very much, everyone.